Okay, that is all for our slideshow presentation. Now it is time to answer your questions. As you have seen, Ron and I have tried to keep up with some of the questions. However, we will go back.
So going back to Colin, your question on the owner builder information. So as presented in the workshop, you'll want to fill out you'll still do a work certification, having a certifier for the owner builder work that you did. Once again, the owner builder experience is only going to apply if you're applying for a B classification. And then that owner builder work will be determined off of the information that you fill out on the owner builder project form. That project form, they'll be looking for permits, final inspection papers. And as far as the amount of time, that is going to be reviewed by our experienced deputy. And just so you know, they will look at the time and the square footage and allot credit for the amount of time that a normal contractor would have taken. So if you're doing an owner builder project of putting in a bathroom in a house, they're going to look at what a contractor would have taken. So while you may have worked on it for a year to complete that bathroom, they're going to look at a journeyman or higher level contractor and what they would have done that. So if that square footage of the bathroom would equate to about what a contractor would take a month to do, then that project is going to get a month. It's not about the amount of time you spent on it, but what that project entailed and how soon it could have been done if it had been done by a contractor.
Okay, so let's go back and see what we not skipped over, but looked at. I believe, Eddie, your question has been answered. I would always refer back to the um, past workshops because there is a lot of information in there and it's all useful information. Brian, will you be able to change your business name? So are you talking about while you're in your application process or are you talking about after the fact? Brian, if you can clarify your question.
Going back to the question we had on volunteer construction work, volunteer construction work rarely translates to experience towards a classification. We're looking for journeyman level and higher. However, all experience that is documented and certified on work experience certification forms that are submitted with the application will be reviewed for possible acceptance of experience. Just know that typically Habitat for Humanity, things like that, as a volunteer worker, doesn't meet the qualifications of journeyman level or higher. We had, does a B2 license have a home improvement salesperson license included already in it? No, each classification is classification upon itself. And then that contractor, if they feel the need to hire home improvement salespeople for their classification and their license, that's a completely separate association with a home improvement salesperson.
Okay, and then Tom says, if I apply for a license as a sole proprietor and later want to start an S Corp, can I transfer the license to the S Corp, assuming I will be the qualifying person of the new company? So Tom, if you apply for a sole ownership and we have issued it, then you are able to go ahead and reapply for a corporation. CSLB doesn't recognize whether it's a S Corp, a C Corp, it's a corporation to us. The C and the S is only through SOS, and that's how they distinguish what kind of corporation it is. So you could have it reissued to a corporation with you as a qualifying individual. If you wanted to transfer the license number or reissue the license number to the corporation, Assuming that you did have a sole proprietor license first, then you could with a 51% ownership in the new corporation.
All right, looks like we have one from Eddie. Me and my partner are looking to both have a license. Will having two licenses under one company create an issue? Or should we simply add one of our names to section 4 of the license application? So a couple different things. One, you can have, each license is going to have an entity type. Obviously, if it's a sole owner, that's a sole owner. There's not going to be additional people on there. Any additional people working under a sole owner would be employees, with the one exception is an employee can be the qualifier and then the owner be listed on the license as well. Uh, there are instances where you can have two licenses under a entity. That entity would have to be a corporation, an LLC, what we refer to as a firm. And there are instances where one firm, as registered with Secretary of State, such as a corporation, can have two licenses under that one firm. Each license has to have a different DBA to distinguish the two licenses, but they can be issued under one firm. There aren't two licenses under one company. No company can operate two named licenses. So, but as you also stated, you can also just be such as a corporation. If you have a corporation and you license that, you can add whoever you want to also be listed as authorized people on that license, such as other officers or directors, and they will all be listed under the one license name and authorized to sign contracts and perform for the license.
Okay, Harrison says, where should I send my transcripts to specifically? So if you're having them sent directly from your school, then they want to send them to CSLB and either our physical address, which is 9821 Business Park Drive, Sacramento, California, 95827. And we also have a PO box. If you look at the application, if you're going to apply for a contractor's license, you will see in the upper left-hand corner, our addresses are displayed there. If you have it sent to you in a sealed official envelope, do not open it, and you can send it in with your completed application and your application fees. This would be the most ideal way to do it. That way they don't get separated from the application and we don't have to go looking for it. And then Brian says, before the application process and after. So, and this was in regard to the business name. Once your application is deemed acceptable, in our terms, it's called posted. You can't make any changes to the application. So you can't change the business name. Well, you can't change the entity structure. So if you were a sole ownership going in as Brian the Builder and you wanted to be Brian the Builder Incorporated, you can't change that. If you can do that once the application is posted. After the fact, after it's issued, you can reapply. Unfortunately, that's what you would have to do, reapply to go from a sole ownership to a corporation in order to change your business name. Now, if it's just a matter of changing Brian the Builder as a sole entity to Brian Builds a Lot, which is still, let's say, a sole entity, you would utilize the application to change a contractor business name. There is still a fee for it, but it's not reapplying. It's changing your business name after the fact. So it is kind of important to know, what am I applying for now? Is this what I really want to do? Otherwise, in the long run, it could cost you more money because you'll have to reapply or change your name later.
All right. Zach wants to know about hot tubs and spas. So if you're doing just repairs on hot tubs and spas, the D35 is the most appropriate classification. I think that also includes putting in vinyl liners in existing pools. All that information would be online on the classifications to show exactly what those can do. C53, obviously C53 could do it as well, in addition to being able to install a pool as well. But if all you're doing is repairing existing spas and hot tubs, then the D35 will take care of that.
James, does a fellow journeyman need to provide a license to qualify my journeyman experience? And this is for a C or a D38 sand and water blasting. No. So your certifier who's going to complete your certification of work experience form does not have to be a licensee. There are a plethora of different individual titles they could be. They could be an employee. They could be a union representative. They could be a business associate. So they don't have to be a licensee. That's not a definite requirement of any certifier.
So, Brian, between LLC, S Corp, C Corp, is there a best between option to choose from, and why? We don't recommend how you set up your business. Also, as Dana already said, we don't distinguish between S Corps and C Corps. That's mainly tax filing things, and that's not in our jurisdiction. We just go by whether a entity is registered as an LLC at Secretary of State or a corporation, whatever their corporation filing is, and that can be foreign or domestic, S Corp, C Corp. It doesn't matter. We just look at it as either a corporation or an LLC. Past that, once again, it's up to the individual to choose what they think is best for their company. Just know that certain ones have additional requirements, such as the LLC, as I mentioned in a previous note in the chat. LLC does require additional bonding and additional liability, and those can sometimes be more expensive than people want to do. So if you are thinking of doing LLC, look into the required bonding and insurance requirements and the cost of those. That may help you make a decision as to which direction you want to go.
Okay, can I 1099 an employee after I am licensed? CSLB does not keep track of how you employ your employees or how you pay them. Just know that if you do 1099 an employee, they're still an employee, so you do have to have workers' compensation. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask, what are the requirements? This is from Herman, it looks like. Needed to obtain a C27 license, and how do I apply for the courses? So once again, if you look at the classification descriptions online, you'll see the type of things that are done under the C27 license. Then once again, as with all classifications, you'd need to show 4 years or 48 months of experience in those types of trades, certified by somebody who has firsthand knowledge of you performing that. So it could be installing trees, gardens, sprinkler systems, all of that falls under the C27 license. So as long as you have 48 months of journeyman level or higher experience and have someone that has firsthand knowledge of that, to fill out your certification of work experience, that would be the requirements to apply for the C27. We don't offer courses or anything. Any schools or courses out there that you see stating that they can get you a license or prepare you for a license are not associated with the board. We don't associate with any of those type of schools or classes. So those are on their own as private individuals.
Okay, Jorge, are there other study guides I can purchase outside from the free ones that you offer or ones from a licensing school? As Ron just said, the licensing schools are not associated with the state, nor are they associated with CSLB. The information that they may provide you, we can't guarantee what that is and if it's going to be correct. That would be at your own risk if you wish to go out and purchase anything from one of those. The study guides that CSLB offers, as you have already seen, are free and they're available on our website. And honestly, they should be the only ones that you really need to review. And they will give references at the end of the practice sheet where it says where these questions were um, derived from, so that if you needed to, you can go to the building code book if that's what's listed there and see that this information is from um, that source.
So uh, is the license issued to a company name or the individual? So all of our licenses are issued to entities. Now, one of our entities does happen to be a sole owner license, so that license is issued to a sole owner person who could still have an employee as the qualifier, but that license is essentially issued to a sole owner entity. Uh, but none of our licenses are sellable. So in other words, nobody can sell their license to somebody else. They can sell their company, but then that whoever buys that company would need to get their own license, or in the case of a corporation, uh, whoever is listed on the corporation as authorized people on the license have the ability to change and everything. When a corporation is sold, a lot of times all they have to do is change the individuals who bought the corporation onto the license, and then it continues on as that corporation, and that license stays with that corporation always. So uh, we don't have, in the sense like a nursing license or a doctor's license that is a license for an individual. All our license are associated with an entity type.
Okay, from Lee. Is there someone at CSLB that can review an application prior to submitting? Unfortunately, no. CSLB does not pre-qualify any individual on anything that may be listed on their application, their possible education credit, and or their work experience. What happens though if something needs further clarification on your application is once we do receive it, then your processing tech will reach out to you asking for corrections. It's not an instant denial. We do not deny applications at the licensing level. So you would have a chance to fix anything if something was not correct on it. Harrison, again, is there a way to see how many credits my education will get prior to applying for the license? I majored in sociology, but have extensive business coursework. Again, Harrison, we cannot pre-qualify anyone, any applicant or licensee on their potential education credit and or work experience. So we do give a guideline that was in the workshop slideshow that tells you possibly what you can get, so you can gauge it from that. But in reality, it would be best to always have the practical work experience. Michael Green, C12 certification. Did you have another question on here? I don't know if you're talking about the C12 classification. There is a lot of questions in here, so I'm going to ask you, Michael, to clarify what you wrote here about a C12 certification. Lee, I also wondered about a March degree for education credit. It's not on the list. I'm not familiar with what that is. If you want to clarify what that is, it may not be on the list because it may not allow us to give education credit for it, but I'm not certain. Furman, one last question is for the company name. I was planning on using my first name initial and my dad's. Would my dad have to get a license as well, or could we just use mine as I obtain it? So what classification, Furman, are you applying for? That's what I would ask first. If it's a corporation, it's not going to be, it's not going to matter with your first initial and your dad's name. However, with the sole ownership, right now, this information is under review when it comes to other individuals' names. Because if you're a sole ownership, it should be your name. Otherwise, you know, the general public, which would be the consumer, could look at it and say, well, who's John? Your name is Furman, you know, so, and I'm just using John as an example. So, you know, it is dependent upon your entity that you're applying for, and it would be something we'd have to review once it came in to see what the differences were. Again, this is something that the board faces, not on a daily basis, but it's something that comes up a lot. And so we're consulting with legal to try to make a good determination that could be moved forward with other applicants in the future. But if you want to give me a little bit more information on, again, what entity you're applying for, and then we can go from there, Furman. Jorge, if some of the questions on the form aren't applicable to me, how do I prevent them from being considered incomplete? Well, what question in general? If you're applying for a sole ownership and you're in the required questions, you are required to answer the required questions. As a sole ownership, you are going to check number 13 because you are the responsible person who is qualifying the license. If you're not an RME, you're not going to check number 14. And then the additional questions after that, the 15 through 20 or 15 through 21, I kind of forget. Those are optional because those are only if they applied to you. So I'd have to know what questions that you're saying aren't applicable to me. So if you can give me a little bit of a clarification on that, Jorge. Michael Green, can I document my work experience on the application and have an additional certifier document my work experience as well on an additional certification form? So Michael, on the application on the certification of work experience form, part 1 is for the applicant to complete. Part 2 is for your certifier. So you should not be outlining your work experience. Your certifier should. As stated before, your certifier is someone who has firsthand knowledge of the work experience that's being set forth on the form. So again, they should be filling this out, saying what they've witnessed or seen firsthand that you can perform. And you would do as many forms as you need to accumulate that minimum of 48 months. Michael Green, I'm assuming, again, you're talking about the C12 classification. So if that's what you're applying for, that, and that was the experience that your certifier had the firsthand knowledge of, then you would, they would put this in part 2 of that form. Brandon and Lee both say Master of Architecture. So we don't, obviously, there is an architecture board. We do not license architects here at CSLB. So it may be that will not grant you credit, and that is why it's not listed on the guidelines of what degrees could be acceptable for classifications that are being applied for here at CSLB. Justin, would PO Box be an acceptable mailing address for a license? It is. However, I do not recommend that you use that for anything overnight. If you're going to overnight, FedEx, UPS, GSO, anything, you're going to do that to the physical address. PO Box, mailing in an application with your fees is perfectly acceptable. Eddie, can you have 2 qualifying individuals under 1 license? You can, but they have to apply for 2 different classifications. they cannot, two people cannot hold the same classification on one license. So you can have, you know, Bob, John, and Jason. One has the A, one has the B, and one has a C10. They can all be listed on a license, but they cannot hold the same classification. One class per person. Brandon, adding to Lee's question, again, March, or B Arch, and the masters and the bachelors. And that's fine. And AAB accredited professional degrees requiring 5+ years of college coursework. However, if they're not directly related to a classification you're applying for, they cannot be taken into consideration as any kind of educational credit for a CSLB license. Again, that's something that will be reviewed if you decide to send those in with your completed application, and a determination will be made after the fact, after the application is sent in and it's reviewed. Eddie, again, or one qualifying individual include an RMO in Section 4. No, Section 4 is only for additional personnel who will be listed on the license. Your RMO, which is your qualifier, will always be listed in Section 3 of the application. Nowhere else. Only the additional people who are not qualifying the license. They are maybe your president, secretary, and treasurer if you're a corporation, or manager or member if you're applying for an LLC. That's where they would be listed in Section 4. Furman, thank you. And I don't know much on the identities and the differences. And for the company name, my dad's name is Furman as well. I was planning on naming the company F&F Landscaping. Okay, so again, which I think you said you don't know the difference. If you're applying for a sole ownership, you can't have F&F. So it can't be Furman and Furman Landscaping. It could definitely be Furman Landscaping. And if you're planning on having your father on a license with you, again, not necessarily could it be a sole ownership. You could apply for a partnership where one of you could be the qualifying partner, the other could be a general partner. Both of you are listed. It could be F&F Landscaping at that point. If you're doing a corporation, it could be F&F Landscaping. Again, listing your father as an additional personnel. But as a sole ownership, if that's what you're going to apply for, again, the initials and the different names is under review with the board, CSLB, and it'd probably be a case-by-case review to see if we would be able to accept it or not. Because again, it can't be misleading to the general public. Michael says, thank you. Matt says, are you able to search for a qualifying individual on the CSLB website and if they're listed under a non-sole ownership? Let me check. You can do it by business name. You can do it, let's see here, personnel name, business name, and license number. So yes, there are 3 buttons that concern the license check, again, license number, business name, or personnel name. So there is a place if you hit the personnel name button where you can put a last name and a first name in to search for if they have a license. Again, you might want to make sure that you have a full, their full legal names, if they have a hyphenated last name, if they have 2 last names. Because if you just put John Johnson and he has a hyphenated last name, Johnson Smith, you know, if you don't put that, it's not going to show up. Stephen or Stefan, is if anything is wrong with the application process and it is denied, will they give the reason why or just send it back? So again, we don't deny applications in the licensing division. They are returned for correction. They are sent back to you to correct, and you should get a detailed letter, email, or phone call stating why it's being sent back and what needs to be done to correct it. And this comes directly from your processing technician once a completed application has been reviewed. Tom, if I apply for a license as a sole proprietor and later want to start a corporation, can I transfer the license to the corporation, assuming I will be the qualifying person in the new company? So it sounds like a question we already had. So you can, if you have your sole ownership issued and later on you want to go to a corporation, as long if you are the qualifying individual and you hold a minimum of 51% ownership, you can transfer the license number or reissue the license number to that corporation. You can also choose, if you don't want to reissue the license number, and even if you have the 51%, you can also choose to have a new number issued to you in the corporation. But again, CSLB does not distinguish between C or S Corp. Corporation is all that we look at here. Eddie, my question is more for the other partner. Although they are qualified to sit for the exam and get the license, going back and forth on how to go about getting license. Since we can both technically get it, is one listed as a qualifying individual and the other partner listed as an RMO? Sorry for the confusion. No. So if you're applying for a partnership, Eddie, you have your qualifying partner, and the qualifier is always the person who is tested, either in the future or if brand new. If you already have, sorry, scratch that. There could be an RMO or an RME on a partnership if that's what you're going to apply for. There are no partners on a corporation or an LLC. So I think we were talking about LLCs and corporations earlier. Qualifying individual is the qualifying individual, period, which would be an RMO, an RME, an RMM, which is a responsible managing member if it's an LLC, or an RMG, which is a responsible managing manager, or qualifying partner if it's a partnership. The other partner, if this truly is a partnership, would be most likely a general partner. RMO, again, responsible managing officer, that is the qualifying individual. The other individual who does not test, who does not hold the classification, who is not qualifying a classification on a license, will always be additional personnel that is listed in section 4 of the application. Furman, you say thank you, that's very helpful. Furman and everybody else, in addition, as stated in the slideshow, just so you know, if your question wasn't answered completely, or if you have additional questions after the fact, you can always send an email to licensing, which is licensing at cslb.ca.gov. We will reiterate that at the end, but if you don't want to answer or ask your question right now, you can always send an email there and one of us will answer that. Brian, I own a great deal of scaffolding and a plaster pump. I would rent and install. I also expertise in stucco. So what licensing would be needed? Sorry, other than work experience, I'm very new to the legality of the workforce. Thank you much. So Brian, I would actually, because it looks like you're, I'm not certain what classification you might want to apply for. What you could do though is send an email to classifications, which is CLASSIFICATIONS at cslb.ca.gov. And this email is also available on our website, as is the licensing email. And you would give our classifications deputy as much detail as what you're doing, what you're going to be using, how it's going to be installed, and whatnot in that email, and ask, which classification would best suit me with the experience that I have. and he could probably make a determination for you. If he needs additional information, then he will ask you. Arash for sole owner name. Oh, last name and construction would be acceptable? Yes. So Arash, if your last name was, again, Johnson, as an example, and you put Johnson Construction, yes, for a sole owner, that would be acceptable, as long as you're applying for the C or for the B general building classification. Construction is not necessarily allowed for all classifications. You might have to specify your classification if it's not the B. Eddie, okay, it's a corporation would be the company, so there's no partners in a corporation. So you would either have an RME, a responsible managing employee, or an RMO, a responsible managing officer, as your qualifier. Any additional personnel listed would just be personnel, and they would be listed on section 4 of the application. Okay, do we have any more questions? And again, if you don't want to ask your question here, if you don't feel like you got a complete answer, you could always email the licensing email. Again, it's licensing@cslb.ca.gov. So Eddie, sorry, trying to make the situation as clear as possible. 2 owners. Okay, there are no owners of a corporation. Both looking to get general contractor license. So what I'm hearing is we both don't need to get the license, only one of us. So the corporation, which is the company, which is also known as a firm, is what's going to be licensed. The individual will test and hold the classification. You cannot hold the same classification on the license. I know you said that both of you are possibly have the experience to do this. However, only one of you can hold the classification on a license for the corporation. That individual would either be an RME, an employee, or an RMO officer. We do not recognize, there are no owners of a corporation. Corporations have a president, a secretary, and a treasurer. So it is, yes, he would only be listed in section 4 if he's not going to be the one who's going to test for the classification. And Eddie, you can always send us an email, like I stated, to the licensing email if you need further classification or further clarification, not classification. But I'm glad you said that makes sense. Do you have any other questions? So I do think that we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Again, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to send an email to the licensing email. And again, that's all the time that we have for today for our workshop. Thank you for all your questions. If you have any other questions about your application, we do encourage you to drop an email to our licensing division. Here's the email address. It's licensing@cslb.ca.gov. Again, that's licensing@cslb.ca.gov. Sorry, licensing@cslb.ca.gov. If at some point you need to reschedule your exams, you can get that process started by dropping an email to exams, exams with an S, @cslb.ca.gov. We've also put together a list of available resources for women considering a career in construction. If you haven't already, be sure to download this presentation to get them. You can download the presentation on the banner at the top of our homepage, which is www.cslb.ca.gov. If you're watching the archive video of this workshop on our YouTube page, you'll find a link